As most of you probably know, JToH has recently had its first major update in over a year, and people really like it. I mean, what's not to like? The lobby is insane, the soundtrack is great, the soul-crushing locations are really good, and the towers themselves are also amazing. As the days go by and more people play and complete the 17 different towers, there are a few general opinions among the community. Even though almost every tower has gotten a bunch of praise, some towers have gotten more hate than others. So I decided to throw my opinion out there and rank all 17 towers in Zone 9 from worst to best. Quick disclaimer, there are major spoilers for every tower in this area. If you want to experience these towers for yourself, then click off now. Before I go on with this ranking, I need to make something clear. I don't dislike any of the towers in this area, except this one. Tower of Falling Up has more of a classic style, but obviously polished to be good for Zone 9 standards. The gameplay is fun, but some of the sections were annoying. There's this one part here where you have to use a bouncy rope thing to hit this button and jump back out of the hole, but getting through the gap is annoyingly precise, and you only have one chance to bounce out until the rope loses too much momentum. It's just a tedious section that really didn't need to be there, and after that are some weird falling platforms that send you straight down to floor 4 if you mess them up. A lot of the bouncy ropes in general are really janky, and even though it's a really cool gimmick, it feels way too inconsistent, especially for a tower of this difficulty. Add on to the fact that this tower is pretty punishing with all of the gameplay on the outside, and the only thing to help is the partial safety net on floor 5. Besides the inconsistencies, the rest of the gameplay is just a little boring. I get that it's a classic tower, but classic towers can be better than this. This citadel is the only entry on the list that was heavily affected by personal experience. I spent over 2 hours playing this citadel just to give up. The gameplay is actually pretty fun. It reminds me of Citadel of Uneasiness or Lethargy. The issue is the ridiculous amount of outsides. There are like 30-ish outsides for this 21 floor citadel, and do you want to know how many of them are fully netted? 3. The only redeeming factor to make these outsides bearable is the button progress, but eventually that just turns into a huge repetitive loop fail. It's fun the first time, but after failing the weird descending unnetted outside dropper section thing 10 times, it's not very fun. Even after you get to the floor 10 net, you continue to loop fail. It might have been fun if you practiced it and already had a bunch of experience with it, but going into it blind is not a good idea, and that significantly hurts the score for me. Sure, I guess. I don't know, it was fun, but it wasn't as fun as the 14 towers higher on the list. It's all themed around some sort of facility, and the more you descend, the more unsafe it becomes, apparently because of some monster. Since it's high remorseless difficulty, it's pretty punishing, with about half of the tower being right above instant death. My main complaint about this tower is that the gameplay is a bit weird. A lot of the mechanics used in this tower, like zip lines, lodges, flips, and stuff like that are cool, but going into it blind is nearly impossible because a lot of the silly client object combinations are not very sight readable. For example, there's this part near the end of the tower with flips on a zip line. It's a cool idea, but at the end you're told to flip twice in a row, and it's not easy to react to this, especially when this entire section is really complicated. Despite the questionable game design, the theming is really cool, and I like the mystery behind this entity that supposedly compromised the facility. Personally, I think that the entity is actually the player, because the facility always closes the layer that you get to next, and also because of this dialogue. I don't know though, that's just a theory. When I first started this tower, I didn't expect anything great. I mean, the frame is super basic compared to any of the other towers, and it uses completely grayscale colors. However, this tower uses lighting changers in a really clever way. They make the color of the lighting so bright that it illuminates everything to be that color, practically making everything color changing. It expands on this lighting idea by adding platforms that are only collidable when the lighting is the same color as the part. Midway through the tower, there's a long collectathon. There are 3 different sections you can go through to collect pieces of dynamite, and once you've gone and collected all 20 pieces, you can blow up the wall to enter the next floor. There's also these weird dream sections, which are basically just sections with really goofy gameplay and 2016 music blasting in the background. At the end of the tower, there's another dynamite hunt, but this time you have a time limit. After you finish, you get a huge block of text and the win pad. Definitely a great tower, but there are some issues which put it this low on the list. When there was a section with the lighting blocks, it wasn't really interesting as much as it was a waiting simulator. For example, there's a push box section which mainly used these parts, and probably about 80% of the time on this section was just waiting for the lighting to change colors. There's also 2 random insta-kill sections, which is kinda weird. Either way, it's still cool, but it just doesn't hold up as well as the other towers do. Like most people, this is the first tower I did when entering Zone 9 for the first time, and it was definitely a good start. The main gimmick for this one is time changers. When you press a daylight button, only the brighter parts will activate, but when you press a midnight button, only darker parts activate, and also the music slows down, which is a nice touch. There's also a midday button, I don't know, but it deactivates both light and dark parts. Because it's only a peak difficult, the gameplay isn't anything insane, but there are some memorable sections. On floor 8, you have to get a bunch of different buttons to activate different things, and go back to the bottom to change times, and go back, and it's all really confusing at first, but it's fun. It also includes what I like to call a pseudo no-jump section. You have to grab one of these rope things and keep carrying it until you use it for a double jump, which basically means you can't jump until then. On floor 9, they use time changes as a weapon. You start the floor in midnight mode, and there are a bunch of spinning spotlights that'll change the time to day, deactivating the ladder you need at the end of the floor. It's creative, and something I've never really seen in JToH before. Fun tower, but also automatically last place because there's a misaligned star at the end. This would have been much higher if this ranking was based solely on gameplay and not my personal enjoyment. Me and a friend started this tower a little less than an hour after Zone 9 came out, so there were no bug fixes yet. Little did we know the tower was literally impossible because of a broken cutscene on floor 6. There goes 20 minutes. Okay, so I went back to it the next morning and it was fixed, but not the cutscene on floor 9. At this point, I didn't want to wait anymore, and I'd already seen other people beat the tower, so I knew it was possible. I restarted immediately after, and I got lucky and beat the tower. The dialogue was still buggy, but it wasn't a soft lock, so I don't care. Besides the bugs, the gameplay was great. It's the official sequel to Tower of Melons in Time in Zone 8, and it has the same silliness as the original. The gameplay is mostly on a netted outside, which I'm usually not a fan of, but they did it really well here because most of the frame was filled as well, and the outsides just really make it look cooler. There's kind of a story, but it's really just a CEO who guides you through the tower and then a statue that comes to life or whatever. I don't know, I couldn't read the entire paragraph in 5 seconds. Cool gameplay, cool design, not cool bugs. This tower alone probably delayed this video by 2 days. It's pretty hard, sitting at high peak remorseless on the difficulty chart. Obviously the main gimmick is the big blocky beefy buttons. Wait, that's like the name of the tower, wow. Anyway, they're mainly used for time sections. Sometimes they can be button progress, which is probably to make up for the insane amount of outside sections. There's an outside on almost every floor, and floor 10 is mostly outside, and it's unnetted because of course it is. Unlike Tower of Falling Up, this is a classic tower done right. The gameplay is simple, without being so simple that it's boring. The timed sections always keep you on your toes, and even when there aren't any button sections, it's still fun. It probably would have been higher on the list if I didn't fail floor 10 like 5 times. I also somehow got flung completely off the tower on floor 7 outside, which I can't show you because I ran out of storage space mid-recording. Yeah, this tower is really fun, nothing much to say. I'm sure this placement would be much different if I had the skill level to actually go for this tower. My hardest is currently a bottom extreme, so take my opinions for this one with a grain of salt. To keep this as accurate as possible, I spent about 2 hours all jumping the tower, but I still don't know much about the punishment or anything like that. Anyway, this tower is really silly. The gameplay is fun pretty much all the way throughout, and the only time I got annoyed was when I kept hitting progress thieves when trying to play through floor 10. There's no real gimmick, but the wacky gameplay keeps it from getting boring. It's just a really cool tower. I'm sure I'd have more feedback if I were able to actually play it. Also, there's this insane looking dragon flying around floor 10, so bonus points for that. This is probably one of the most unique towers in this area, even if all the towers are pretty unique. The entire tower is around a really big cake, and for the final section you need to light up candles at the top. The main gimmicks are Sugar Rush buttons and Z platforms. Sugar Rush buttons, when pressed, will give you a huge burst in speed, but only for a second. Even though it abuses quick speed changers, which are usually inconsistent, almost every use of these buttons are really well done. When there aren't any Sugar Rush buttons, you just have permanent double speed. Z platforms are really weird. Think about it, if X platforms push, then Z platforms pull. You can use a rope connected to these platforms to pull it in a certain direction. These are used in various weird ways, and they never really get boring. These gimmicks are used really well in combination, and add on that the tower is really forgiving, having a net on every floor, and this tower makes for a great experience overall. The ending section is also a great finale and a final burst of adrenaline before you can finally hit the win pad. I actually kinda like this tower. Sure, the design isn't up to Zone 9 standards, but the idea is really cool, and the gameplay is fun too. I think a lot of people have this idea that this tower is full of insta-kills and soft locks, but there's really only one floor that's fully a soft lock, and other parts of this tower are decently forgiving. The shift lock mechanic makes for some really wacky gameplay. I especially like the backwards wraps because they're really satisfying to pull off, and the only shift lock gimmick I didn't like is the trust jumps because they're a bit inconsistent at times. For some reason, there's also this random disco party on floor 9, which is supposed to be set somewhere near the center of the earth, so I don't really know how that got there, but it's kind of funny, so I'll let it slide. The gameplay is fun, and there's very few sections that are easily loop failable. Even though I haven't beaten this tower, I've gotten to floor 10 legit, and I still enjoy playing through it. Similar to empty meaningless patterns, this is another soul crushing that I can't beat. I do have the skill level to beat this if I wanted to, but I didn't want to delay this video even more, so I set out on all jumping it and getting to floor 5. I actually am able to play this tower though, so take my opinions with 3 grains of salt this time. Like a lot of newer modern towers, the majority of the gameplay is outside, and by that I mean there is no inside. We've devolved from actual structures with interiors to a one-sided wall. I can't complain, it makes for fun gameplay. If you couldn't tell by looking at the ridiculous frame, the main gimmick for this tower is modifier fields. When you're inside them, you're put under some sort of restriction. There's fields where you have to keep walking, keep jumping, stop jumping, somewhere you get a huge burst of speed, bounce pads, and probably a few more that I forgot about. This makes for some really unique gameplay because you have to think about what inputs you need to press in a completely different way, especially with keep walking and keep jumping sections. The only gameplay I really didn't like was this janky spinning section on floor 10, but it's probably easier once you practice it enough. Fun gameplay and really cool design. So first of all, this frame looks insane, and when you play it, it's just as crazy as the outside. The main gimmick of this tower is something that isn't seen in any other tower besides this one: interactive levers. These are basically those things you see in other games that need you to press a certain button to interact with it. Along with this, there's also some sections that lock your camera, forcing you to play in a really weird perspective. The gameplay is really fun, and it is mostly outside, but it's all netted. On floor 2, which is technically floor 9, there's a tower crossing-like section where you play through small modified segments of Armor Had's other in-game towers. On floor 1, which is technically floor 10, there's a mini-boss fight, but there's no real boss you're fighting, so you kinda just jump around kill bricks. This tower really isn't too unique, but the gameplay is just so enjoyable to play through the entire time. Really just a great tower all the way through with nothing quirky to make it more complicated. I don't know why I like it so much, but this is probably my favorite looking tower in Zone 9. The frame is just so chaotic but so well done at the same time. I don't know how they did it. There's so much stuff all around the place that you have no idea where the actual floors are, but the routing is surprisingly simple once you actually go through it. My only complaint with the frame is that the colors of the boxing gloves are really bright. But in terms of gameplay, it's still pretty good. This tower features a lot of really silly X-pusher mechanisms, and that's where most of the difficulty is. It's simple, but there's a lot of really creative ideas and sections that never make the tower boring. There is one thing though, and for a lot of people it ruined the experience: the soft locks. I heard there were tons of soft locks before I started the tower, but there's really just a few, and none of the gameplay in them is that hard at all. The only stressful soft lock for me was the final section, with the kill brick walls, stressful music, and pretty hard gameplay. This placement is probably really biased because I never fell in any of the soft locks when beating this tower, but I don't care, this is my ranking. Oh my god, this tower was an experience. I was gonna place this in the bottom 3 on this list for multiple reasons. The gameplay was repetitive at times, it was really confusing, and also this took me over 2 hours to beat. But I really don't think it deserves a spot in the bottom 3. I put it this high simply because it was probably the most interesting and surprising experience I've ever had in JToH over my 4 years of playing. Again, disclaimer for this part: if you want to experience this tower for yourself, skip to this timestamp to avoid spoilers. Anyway, so you start off in a relatively basic tower. I don't have the time to go over the entire route of this tower, so I'm going to skip over a bit here. It has simple modern gameplay, there's a bit of backtracking and silly gimmicks, and wait, why is it making me do it again? Okay, well after you do it for a second time, albeit with a few changes, you get to this weird tunnel where you're suddenly teleported into floor 3. It's just another boring floor, but after that you're teleported to a weird section. This is where the real fun begins. You start in a weird liminal space of sorts. There's a bunch of mysterious holes and entryways that seem to loop within itself. It feels weirdly familiar, like you've seen this in a dream before. Eventually you'll come across some actual gameplay, and when you finally figure out how to solve the weird maze-like section, what? It's dreamlike. It's not weird, but it's not normal. There's some faint gameplay far away that you'll never get to play. There's the quiet wind behind the lonely, atmospheric music constantly reminding you that there's nobody here. But it's okay. After you finish this part, you can finally... oh my god, there's more. Don't worry, so much more. It still feels weirdly disconnected. Yeah, there's multiple sections of gameplay, but nothing really fits together at all. Like a dream. After a while, you're taken to a weird chasm. There's so many different places, but none of them make any sense. They're all just connected by a tiny hallway or curtain. There's a house, there's an upside-down church, there's a dark void, there's a glitchy, empty room, there's a Freddy Fazbear-looking thing, I don't know, and there's even a satanic ritual. In the ritual place, you could find a closed gateway. You're told to find 5 items and 2 buttons. There are so many places to go, but so few places to find. It's all just a maze, and the items could literally be anywhere. After all, this tower has already become everything you can imagine and more. What can it do next? There's a flower hidden at the top of a short obby in the house. There's a box past a locked door that you can only access from a really annoying pushbox challenge. There's a mysterious eye in the ritual, there's a ripped teddy bear in the church. It's been over 90 minutes since I've seen any actual gameplay. Finally, you find all 5 items, and on the other side of the gateway, you get more keys that are used to unlock the wind pad. Well, that's nice, but how do I even escape? Well, actually, me and the other 3 people I was playing this with could not figure this out. We had seen a transparent conveyor on a bridge, but we could not figure out how to get to it. Eventually, one of us found out that you could dance clip through a wall and glitch into the room we needed to get to. So after cheesing it, we found the exit and could finally hit the wind pad. Nope, there's another section, but that's fine because the final section was just parkour anyway, and it was kind of boring, so that's pretty much the end of the tower. Yay! This tower wasn't even a tower, it was just a game. I forgot I was even in JToH for most of it, and even though I never want to do that again, I'm so glad I beat it. Oh yeah, also one of the people I was beating it with got disconnected on the final section after over 2 hours. Of course this tower has to be in the top 3. There's a lot of mixed feelings about this one though, and I agree with both sides. On one hand, it's extremely well done, from the gameplay to the design to the music choices, it's all amazing. On the other hand, it's hard to get consistent, especially with a lot of the gameplay being questionable at times. I experienced this a lot myself when beating this, and what really sucked for me was that a lot of my fails really just didn't feel like my fault. When you fail something, in any game, JToH, Geometry Dash, you name it, your failure should feel like your own fault. It should be a learning experience. Next time, just press the spacebar a little later, or maybe try a different approach. In this tower, when you fail, most of the time, it's less of a learning moment and more of a letdown that you have to play the same gameplay again. This, including the fact that you only have a limited amount of lives, really can bring motivation down. And I'm not saying the tower is bad at all, there's still a reason this tower got into the top 3. It's just that it can be really irritating at times. For the most part, the gameplay was really fun, and the gravity changers, jump boosters, bouncers, and other tech spam gimmicks are almost always used really creatively. It's just brought down a bit by the somewhat inconsistent gameplay, but it's still definitely one of the best towers in this area. This tower was really hard to place. I haven't beaten it, but I've gotten to the end of floor 3 and I've all jumped it multiple times. I didn't really know whether I should place it lower because I don't know the full experience of playing this, or place it higher because it's just so fun to play. Like Tower of Hollow Reformations, this tower has extremely learning gameplay, which basically means that you need to practice a lot if you want to beat this tower. The entire frame is shaped like a drill, and you'd think that that would be mentioned in the name of the tower, but nope. Wildly wacky wonders, but that works too because this tower is really wacky. As of writing this video, it's at mid-high terrifying difficulty, and that's because this tower is carried by insta-kills. Failing pretty much anything will send you straight into instant death, forcing you to completely restart, similar to a roguelike game. It sounds bad, and it definitely does drag down the score a bit, but it's probably the best use of insta-kills in any tower. Sure, they're everywhere, but the gameplay is easy to master once you practice it enough, and the tower isn't too long to where you get annoyed to replay it every time you fail. Unlike TOHR, failing in this tower is actually a learning experience, and even when replaying the gameplay over and over again, it's fun. The design is also great too, with the final floor being inside the drill itself, which looks really cool when you're actually inside it. I mean, just look at this. Floor 9 also looks like a dragon head, which is really cool. Even though I'm probably nowhere near the skill level to beat this, it's still one of my favorite towers in the entire game. I had a really hard time deciding whether this or Triple W should take the first place spot. I moved these back and forth multiple times, but I think Tower of Eye Candy just barely beats it out in my opinion. Almost everything is done here extremely well, and there were very few moments that I felt annoyed playing this tower. It's punishing, but not too punishing, and it's also not too forgiving either. The gameplay is really well done, and they clearly put a lot of effort in making this tower as fair and fun as possible. It's not groundbreaking by any means, but a tower doesn't need to do anything unique as long as it's fun. There are also a few sections that invert your player movement, which is really trippy, and it really makes you think about what you actually need to press. I actually found myself having to plan ahead what inputs I needed to put in to pass a jump just because my muscle memory was so messed up. The design is top notch, and although it's relatively simple, the color combinations are perfect and the music is just the cherry on top. I especially love the Floor 4 song just because it sounds so satisfying. My only minor issues with this tower are the no jump section on floor 9 and this specific jump on floor 10. Luckily, both of these are completely netted, so it doesn't matter that much, and it barely affects my enjoyment with this tower at all. This tower was an amazing experience overall, and definitely deserves the title of my favorite tower in Zone 9. So, there we go. Every tower in Zone 9. It's definitely not a perfect list. If I was much better at the game, maybe my placements for some of the remorseless and soul-crushing towers would be different, but for now, this is the best I can do. This entire zone was really fun to play, and I really liked going through everything it had to offer, from wacky to silly to a downright masterpiece. This list was really hard to put together. Every tower here has its own fun gimmick, gameplay style, and design, and it's really hard to compare them when they're all so different. I had multiple towers here move up or down over 5 spots, including Tower of Nothing New, which I moved from the bottom 5 to the top 5. Because they were all so hard to rank, the main variable I used to choose which towers were higher or lower was my personal experience. I mean, obviously a few towers would move down just because I didn't really like them, like Falling Up or Minus Facility, but a lot of the decisions depended on how I played through them. This means that a lot of you will probably have much different opinions than I do, and that's okay. Remember that this is a personal ranking, not a definitive list. This is my second ranking video on this channel, and if you have some critiques or different opinions, please let me know in the comments. I want these videos to be the best they can. That's it for now. Good night, everyone.